Picture this. A shy student's arm is about to be branded with a hot metal ruler by merciless bullies in an empty classroom. Then he unleashes a devastating Taekwondo combination that sends them crashing through desks in seconds. Marcus Chun's explosive retaliation is a story of hidden strength and justice that will leave you speechless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the rust-colored heartland of Millfield, Ohio, where abandoned factory smokestacks pierce the gray autumn sky like forgotten monuments to a prosperous past, and the scent of burning leaves mixed with the distant smell of motor oil from the local garage, 17-year-old Marcus Chun moved through the crowded hallways of Riverside High School like a shadow afraid of its own reflection. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across worn linoleum floors that had seen decades of teenage dreams and disappointments, while the constant hum of conversation and slamming lockers created a symphony of adolescent chaos that Marcus had learned to navigate in complete silence. Marcus was the kind of student teachers often forgot to call on, not out of malice, but simply because he had perfected the art of invisibility. At 5'6" with a lean frame that seemed to fold in on itself whenever confronted with conflict, he possessed the unfortunate combination of being just small enough to appear vulnerable, yet just different enough to attract unwanted attention. His dark hair fell across his forehead in an attempt to shield his expressive brown eyes from a world that had taught him early that being noticed meant being targeted. His clothes, always clean but clearly secondhand, told the story of a family stretching every dollar until it screamed, and his worn sneakers squeaked softly against the floor as he hurried between classes, clutching his books like a shield against his chest. The hallways of Riverside High were an ecosystem of unspoken hierarchies and brutal social mathematics, where popularity was currency and difference was debt. Marcus had calculated his place in this system long ago and found himself residing somewhere near the bottom, not quite invisible enough to escape notice entirely, but not remarkable enough to demand respect. His mixed Korean and Irish heritage made him stand out in a town where diversity was more of a concept than a reality, and his quiet demeanor only seemed to amplify his otherness in the eyes of those who fed on the weakness of others. Marcus carried secrets in his silence, wounds that had been carved into his soul 3 years earlier when his father, Daniel Chun, had walked out of their small apartment with nothing more than a hastily packed duffel bag and a promise to call that never came. The abandonment had left an emptiness in their home that seemed to echo in every corner, a void that his mother Elena worked desperately to fill with double shifts at Millfield General Hospital, where she cleaned rooms and emptied bedpans while studying for her nursing certification by the light of her phone during brief breaks. The weight of watching his mother sacrifice her sleep, her health, and her dreams to keep them afloat had settled on Marcus's shoulders like a lead blanket, making him hunch forward as if he were carrying the entire world on his back. Elena Chun was a woman forged by necessity and tempered by love, her hands permanently stained with the antiseptic smell of the hospital, despite her constant washing, her eyes carrying the deep fatigue of someone who had learned to function on 3 hours of sleep and pure determination. She had immigrated from Seoul as a young woman, following dreams of opportunity that had seemed so much brighter from across the ocean, only to find herself trapped in a cycle of minimum wage jobs and maximum effort with little to show for it, except the fierce pride she took in raising her son alone. Every morning before her shift, she would press a gentle hand to Marcus's cheek and whisper in Korean, "Stay strong, my brave boy," though they both knew that bravery felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. Elena's philosophy had been shaped by her own struggles with discrimination and hardship, teaching Marcus that patience was a virtue and that violence only begot more violence. She spoke often of her grandmother's wisdom, how the bamboo survived storms not by fighting the wind but by bending with it, How water carved through mountains not through force, but through persistence. She had raised Marcus to believe that education was their pathway out of poverty, that keeping his head down and his grades up would eventually lead to a scholarship and a better life. But she had never attended American high school herself and couldn't foresee how her gentle philosophy would fare against the savage reality of teenage cruelty. The torment had begun during Marcus's freshman year when Tyler Brooks, a junior with the build of someone who had been lifting weights since middle school and the cruel intelligence of someone who understood exactly how to weaponize insecurity, had first noticed the quiet Asian kid who flinched whenever anyone raised their voice. Tyler was the kind of bully who had elevated harassment to an art form, smart enough to avoid the attention of teachers while systematically destroying his targets with surgical precision. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident swagger that came from never having experienced real consequences for his actions, and he possessed an uncanny ability to sense weakness like a predator scenting blood on the wind. Tyler's crew consisted of Derek Manning, a red-headed linebacker whose family owned the local auto parts store and who used his size to intimidate anyone Tyler pointed him toward. Jake Sullivan, whose quick wit and cruel tongue could slice through a person's self-esteem with the efficiency of a razor blade. And Connor Walsh, whose family money bought him both protection and the assumption that he could get away with anything. Together, they formed a pack of wolves that prowled the hallways of Riverside High, feeding on the fear and humiliation of anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. The harassment had started small, as it always did, with accidental shoulder checks in the hallway that sent Marcus's books cascading across the floor while students stepped over them without a second glance. Tyler would time these encounters perfectly, striking when teachers were between classes or distracted, always with witnesses who were either too afraid or too entertained to intervene. The shoulder checks evolved into jokes about Marcus's heritage, whispered comments about his clothes, and increasingly aggressive physical intimidation that walked the fine line between bullying and assault without ever quite crossing into territory that would guarantee administrative intervention. Marcus's response had always been exactly what his mother had taught him: keep his head down, clean up his scattered belongings, and walk away. He would swallow his humiliation like bitter medicine, his face burning with shame as laughter followed him down the hallway, his hands trembling with suppressed anger that he had no outlet for except the journals he filled with his fury in the safety of his bedroom. He told himself that graduation was only 2 years away, that this was temporary, that if he could just survive long enough, he would escape to college and leave this nightmare behind forever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What Tyler and his crew didn't know, what no one at Riverside High could have possibly suspected, was that every Tuesday and Thursday evening at 6 o'clock, Marcus Chun transformed from victim to warrior in the modest confines of Dragon's Path Taekwondo Academy, a humble dojang tucked between Tony's Laundromat and Marco's Pizza in the tired strip mall on the edge of town. The academy was nothing impressive from the outside, its windows covered with faded posters of tournaments and achievements, its sign bearing the scars of too many harsh Ohio winters. But inside those walls, Marcus had found something that 3 years of torment had nearly convinced him didn't exist: his own strength. Master Kim was a man who seemed to carry the weight of decades in his weathered hands and the wisdom of centuries in his dark eyes that missed nothing and forgave even less. He had immigrated from South Korea 30 years earlier, carrying with him the disciplines and traditions of Tang Soo Do and Taekwondo that he had learned as a child growing up in the shadow of the Korean War. His own father had been a master before him, and his grandfather before that, creating a lineage of warriors that stretched back through generations of conflict and survival. Master Kim's body bore the scars of his own battles, both in the ring and in life, but his spirit remained unbroken, his dedication to his art absolute. Marcus had discovered the academy by accident during his freshman year, walking home from school along an unfamiliar route to avoid Tyler's crew when he heard the rhythmic sound of kicking and the sharp commands being issued in Korean through the academy's open door. Something about those sounds called to him, perhaps an echo of his mother's voice speaking her native language, perhaps simply the desperate need for somewhere to belong. He had stood outside for 20 minutes that first day, watching through the window as students of all ages practiced forms and sparring, their movements precise and powerful, their focus absolute. Master Kim had noticed him, of course. The old master made it his business to notice everything, especially lost young men who carried pain in their shoulders and defeat in their eyes. He had emerged from the academy and approached Marcus with the kind of directness that cut through pretense like a blade through silk. "You want to learn?" he had asked, and something in his tone suggested that this was less a question than a recognition of inevitability. Marcus had nodded, unable to trust his voice, and Master Kim had simply opened the door wider and gestured him inside. The first lesson had been about respect. Respect for the art, respect for the dojang, respect for oneself and one's opponents. Master Kim had explained that Taekwondo was not about revenge or aggression, but about discipline, control, and the cultivation of inner strength that could only come from facing one's fears and limitations head-on. He had warned Marcus that the path would be difficult, that there would be no shortcuts, and that true mastery required not just physical training but spiritual development that could take a lifetime to achieve. Marcus had thrown himself into the training with the desperation of someone who had finally found something that made sense in a world that seemed designed to humiliate him. 3 times a week he would arrive at the academy still carrying the stings and bruises of another day at Riverside High, and 3 times a week Master Kim would help him transform that pain into power. The physical conditioning was brutal at first, his muscles screaming in protest as he learned to kick higher, punch harder, and move with the fluid grace that Taekwondo demanded. His flexibility improved week by week until he could deliver head-high kicks with devastating accuracy. His balance developed until he could maintain perfect form even while executing complex combinations. And his speed increased until his movements became blurs of controlled violence. But it was the mental training that truly transformed him. Master Kim taught him to meditate, to find the calm center within himself that no external force could touch. He learned to channel his anger and fear into focus, to transform his emotional turmoil into the kind of crystalline clarity that allowed him to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. The Korean philosophy of indomitable spirit became more than just words. It became the foundation upon which he rebuilt his sense of self-worth. The forms, or pumse, were like moving meditation, each technique flowing into the next with the inevitability of water finding its course down a mountainside. Marcus learned Taegak Il-jang and Taegak I-jang, then progressed through the increasingly complex patterns until he could perform them with the kind of precision that made Master Kim nod with approval. Each form told a story of conflict and resolution, of meeting force with appropriate response, of finding victory not through brutality, but through the perfect application of technique and timing. The sparring was where Marcus truly came alive. Wearing protective gear and facing opponents of varying skill levels, he learned to read body language, to anticipate attacks, and to respond with counterattacks that were both defensive and offensive. Simultaneously, his legs, strengthened by years of training, could deliver kicks with the power of a sledgehammer, while his hands moved with the speed and precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Master Kim taught him that in Taekwondo, the legs were the primary weapons, capable of generating far more power than the arms, and possessing the reach necessary to control distance and timing. Marcus excelled particularly at the axe kick, a devastating technique where the leg is raised high and brought down like a hammer onto an opponent's head or shoulder, and the tornado kick, a spinning technique that could generate enormous power while confusing an opponent's defensive timing. His sidekicks became legendary in the small academy, delivered with such force that they could knock a heavy bag completely off its chain. And his combination techniques flowed together with the kind of seamless precision that marked a true martial artist. By his junior year, Marcus had earned his red belt, just one rank below the coveted black belt that represented true mastery of the basic techniques. Master Kim had begun preparing him for his black belt test, warning him that the physical requirements were only the beginning, that a true black belt must demonstrate not just technical skill, but the kind of character and self-control that could withstand any test. The belt does not make the man, Master Kim would say. The man makes the belt worthy. At school, however, Marcus remained the same quiet, seemingly helpless target that Tyler and his crew had been tormenting for years. He never spoke of his training, never hinted at the power that lay dormant beneath his unassuming exterior. His mother knew, of course, and supported his training even though the monthly fees stretched their budget beyond comfort, but she had made him promise never to use his skills unless absolutely necessary. Violence should always be the last resort, she would remind him, echoing the philosophy that Master Kim preached daily. The bullying had escalated gradually throughout Marcus's junior year, Tyler's crew growing bolder as they sensed graduation approaching, and their window for inflicting maximum damage closing. They had moved beyond simple physical intimidation to more creative forms of humiliation, filling his locker with garbage, posting embarrassing photos they had taken without his knowledge on social media, and spreading rumors about his family's financial situation that followed him through every class like a toxic cloud. Marcus endured it all with the stoic patience his mother had taught him and the inner calm that Master Kim had helped him cultivate. He told himself that it would end soon, that he just needed to survive a few more months, that revenge was beneath him, and that his training was about self-improvement, not retaliation. But with each passing day, each new humiliation, each moment when he was forced to clean up after their cruelty, while his classmates looked on with a mixture of pity and relief that it wasn't happening to them, something deep inside him began to crack. The pressure built like steam in a kettle with no release valve, his nightly training sessions becoming more intense as he poured his frustration into every kick, every punch, every form. Master Kim noticed the change, the way Marcus's techniques carried more aggression than they should, the way his breathing became labored not from exertion but from suppressed rage. During one particularly intense session, the old master had called him aside and spoken to him about the difference between strength and violence, about how true power came from restraint rather than unleashing, about how the greatest victory was often achieved without fighting at all. But the breaking point was approaching with the inevitability of a gathering storm, and on a cold November afternoon when the first snow of winter was beginning to dust the parking lot of Riverside High, Tyler Brooks would make the mistake that would finally shatter Marcus Chun's carefully maintained facade and unleash years of suppressed training in a display of controlled violence that would change everything forever. The industrial landscape of Millfield stretched endlessly beyond the grimy windows of Riverside High School, a testament to America's forgotten promises and abandoned dreams. Massive concrete silos stood like tombstones against the pewter sky, their surfaces stained with decades of rust and neglect, while skeletal remains of manufacturing plants dotted the horizon like the bones of some prehistoric beast. The November wind carried the acrid smell of the chemical plant that still operated on the town's eastern edge, mixing with the sweet aroma of burning maple leaves and the ever-present undertone of car exhaust from the interstate that cut through the heart of town like a scar. Inside the school's aging corridors, the fluorescent lights flickered with the persistence of dying insects, casting an unflattering pallor over everything they touched. The walls, painted institutional green sometime in the 1980s, bore the accumulated Scratches and dents of thousands of students who had passed through these halls, carrying their own burdens of adolescent angst and small-town desperation. Motivational posters hung askew in dusty frames, their messages about perseverance and achievement seeming almost mocking in an environment where survival often took precedence over success. The student body of Riverside High reflected the complex demographics of a town caught between its industrial past and an uncertain future. There were the children of families who had managed to weather the economic storms, their designer clothes and confident bearing marking them as the inheritors of whatever prosperity remained in Millfield. Then there were the kids from the trailer parks and subsidized housing complexes, their defiant attitudes and worn clothing telling stories of resilience forged in the crucible of poverty. Marcus Chen existed somewhere in the middle of this social spectrum, neither wealthy enough to command respect nor poor enough to earn the grudging admiration reserved for those who had nothing left to lose. The school's atmosphere was charged with the particular tension that comes from putting nearly 1,200 teenagers in an environment that felt more like a prison than a place of learning. The hallways echoed with the sound of slamming lockers, hurried footsteps, and the constant chatter that served as background noise to the daily drama of high school life. Teachers moved through this chaos with the weary resignation of soldiers in a war they couldn't win, their idealism long since ground down by budget cuts, overcrowded classrooms, and the crushing realization that many of their students were destined for lives of quiet desperation in a town that offered few opportunities for escape. Marcus navigated this environment with the careful precision of someone who had learned to read danger in the tilt of a head, the tone of a laugh, the way groups of students shifted their formation when he approached. His locker was located in the most vulnerable section of the building, a corner near the science wing where teachers rarely ventured between classes and where the acoustics seemed designed to amplify humiliation while muffling cries for help. Every morning, he approached his locker with the same mixture of dread and hope, praying that he would find it undamaged and knowing that disappointment was more likely than relief. The physical layout of Riverside High seemed designed to create opportunities for predators like Tyler Brooks to corner their prey. Long corridors with blind corners, stairwells that teachers avoided, and bathroom facilities that might as well have been marked as no man's land all provided perfect hunting grounds for those who fed on the weakness of others. The cafeteria was perhaps the worst of all, a cavernous space filled with round tables that created natural boundaries between social groups, where sitting alone was tantamount to wearing a target on your back and where the noise level made it impossible for supervisors to hear what was really being said. Marcus had learned to time his movements through the school with military precision, calculating routes that would minimize his exposure to Tyler's crew while still allowing him to reach his classes on time. He knew which bathrooms were safe during which periods, which hallways to avoid when certain teachers were absent, and which corners provided the best escape routes when retreat became necessary. This constant state of hypervigilance was exhausting, leaving him mentally drained before the academic day even began, but it had become as natural to him as breathing. The weather in Millfield during late autumn was a character unto itself, pressing down on the town with the weight of impending winter and the promise of months of gray skies and bitter cold. The trees that lined the streets had shed most of their leaves, creating a carpet of brown and gold that turned to slush under the wheels of passing cars. The air had that particular sharpness that comes just before the first serious snowfall, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke from chimneys and the metallic tang of approaching storm systems rolling in from the Great Lakes. Inside the Chun family's modest apartment, the atmosphere was one of quiet determination tinged with exhaustion. The two-bedroom unit on the third floor of a complex that had seen better days was kept spotlessly clean despite Elena's grueling work schedule, every surface scrubbed until it gleamed and every possession carefully maintained because replacement was not an option. The furniture was a mixture of second-hand finds and pieces that had survived multiple moves, each item carrying its own history of previous owners and accumulated memories. Elena Chun moved through their small home with the efficiency of someone who had learned to maximize every moment of her limited free time. Her nursing textbooks were stacked neatly on the kitchen table, their pages marked with highlighting and notes written in her careful handwriting, evidence of late-night study sessions fueled by instant coffee and determination. She had been working toward her RN certification for 3 years, squeezing classes and clinical rotations around her work schedule at the hospital, driven by the dream of providing a better life for herself and her son. The apartment's walls were decorated with photos that told the story of their small family's journey, pictures of Elena as a young woman in Seoul, images of Marcus as a chubby-cheeked toddler, school photos that marked the passage of years, and the gradual transformation of an outgoing child into a withdrawn teenager. There were no photos of Daniel Chun, Marcus's father, those having been quietly removed after his departure and stored in a box that neither mother nor son spoke about, but both thought about more often than they cared to admit. The kitchen bore the evidence of Elena's attempts to maintain their cultural connections, despite the constraints of their budget and location. Glass jars filled with Korean spices lined the counter, their labels written in Hangul characters that Marcus could read but rarely had occasion to use. The rice cooker was the most expensive appliance they owned, a wedding gift from Elena's mother that had made the journey from Seoul to Ohio and had been faithfully producing perfect rice for nearly 2 decades. The refrigerator was covered with Marcus's old artwork and academic achievements, a shrine to his potential that Elena maintained with religious devotion. Elena's work schedule was a carefully orchestrated dance of survival that left little room for rest or recreation. Her day shift at Millfield General ran from 6 in the morning until 6 at night, followed by a quick dinner and then evening classes at the community college 3 nights a week. On weekends, she picked up extra shifts in the hospital's laundry department, the physical demands of lifting and folding industrial loads of linens adding another layer of exhaustion to her already overwhelming routine. Despite this punishing schedule, she never missed an opportunity to check on Marcus's homework, to listen to his day, or to remind him of her love and her dreams for his future. The financial pressures that shaped their daily existence were a constant presence in the apartment, visible in the careful way Elena counted out bills, the generic brands that filled their pantry, and the second-hand clothes that she altered and mended with the skill of someone who had learned to make do. She had grown up in a family of modest means in Seoul, but poverty in Korea had been different somehow, buffered by extended family and community support that simply didn't exist in Millfield. Here, they were truly on their own, navigating a system that seemed designed to keep people like them trapped in cycles of barely getting by. Marcus was acutely aware of his mother's sacrifices, awareness that weighed on him like a physical burden and influenced every decision he made. He had learned early not to ask for things they couldn't afford, to appreciate the gifts she managed to provide on birthdays and holidays, and to understand that his success in school was not just his own responsibility, but a sacred trust that carried the weight of all her hopes and dreams. This knowledge was both motivating and paralyzing, pushing him to excel academically while simultaneously making him afraid to take risks or draw attention to himself in ways that might jeopardize his future. The absence of his father was a wound that had never fully healed, affecting Marcus in ways that he was only beginning to understand as he matured. Daniel Chun had been a charming man with big dreams and bigger problems, his gambling addiction and inability to hold steady employment eventually driving him to abandon his family rather than face the consequences of his failures. Marcus remembered him as a man of sudden enthusiasms and crushing disappointments, someone who could make the most ordinary day feel magical, but who could also disappear for days at a time, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. The impact of his father's abandonment went beyond the obvious financial hardships it created. Marcus had internalized a deep fear of disappointing others, a tendency to avoid conflict at all costs, and a belief that he was somehow responsible for holding his small family together through the force of his own perfection. He had become hyper-vigilant about his mother's moods, reading exhaustion and stress in the set of her shoulders or the way she rubbed her temples, and responding by trying to make himself as invisible and undemanding as possible. Elena's philosophy of life had been shaped by her own experiences with discrimination and hardship, both in Korea and in America. She had learned to navigate systems that were not designed for people like her, to find dignity in work that others considered beneath them, and to maintain hope in circumstances that would have broken many people. Her approach to Marcus's bullying problem reflected this worldview. She believed that education and perseverance would eventually triumph over ignorance and cruelty, that keeping one's head down and working hard was the surest path to success, and that violence only created more violence. This philosophy was reinforced by her Buddhist beliefs, which emphasized compassion even for one's enemies and the importance of accepting suffering as part of the human condition. She had taught Marcus to meditate when he was young, to find peace in stillness and strength in acceptance, though she didn't know that these early lessons would later blend with his martial arts, training to create something far more powerful than she had intended. Her evening prayers often included requests for Marcus's safety and success, as well as forgiveness for those who had hurt him, though she would have been surprised to learn how difficult that forgiveness was becoming for her son. The financial strain of supporting Marcus's Taekwondo training was significant for Elena, requiring her to work extra shifts and cut corners in other areas of their budget. But she had recognized something in her son's demeanor after he started training that made every sacrifice worthwhile. The defeated slump of his shoulders had gradually straightened. The constant anxiety that had marked his early teenage years had begun to fade, and there was a new confidence in his voice when he spoke about his day. She didn't fully understand the martial arts world that had captured her son's attention, but she could see that it was healing something inside him that her love alone had been unable to reach. The Dragon's Path Taekwondo Academy had become more than just a place of training for Marcus. It had become a sanctuary where he could shed the identity of victim that had been forced upon him at school and discover the warrior that had always existed within him. The modest dojang occupied a space that had previously housed a discount electronics store, its interior transformed by Master Kim's vision into a place where ancient traditions could flourish in the most unlikely of settings. The walls were covered with mirrors that reflected every movement, every technique, every mistake and triumph, while inspirational posters bearing Korean text reminded students of the philosophical foundations that supported their physical training. Master Kim himself was a living bridge between two worlds, carrying within him the traditional knowledge passed down through generations of Korean martial artists while adapting those teachings to serve American students facing very modern problems. His own journey to Millfield had been circuitous, involving stints as a military instructor, a security contractor, and a youth counselor before he finally found his calling as a teacher of traditional martial arts. He had opened the academy not to become wealthy, which was clearly impossible in a town like Millfield, but because he believed that the discipline and confidence that Taekwondo could provide were desperately needed by young people who had few other sources of positive guidance. The master's teaching philosophy was based on the belief that every student carried within them the potential for greatness, regardless of their background, physical attributes, or current circumstances. He had seen shy children transform into confident leaders, angry teenagers learn to channel their rage into productive outlets, and broken adults rediscover their sense of self-worth through the structured progression of belt ranks and the supportive community of fellow practitioners. His approach to instruction was demanding but fair, pushing students to exceed their own expectations while never asking them to become something they were not meant to be. The physical space of the academy reflected Master Kim's practical approach to teaching and his respect for the traditions he represented. The training floor was covered with high-quality mats that could absorb the impact of falls and kicks while providing the firm foundation necessary for proper technique development. Heavy bags hung from reinforced ceiling mounts, their surfaces bearing the accumulated impact of thousands of strikes from students of all skill levels. Wooden boards for breaking practice were stacked neatly in one corner, while an assortment of protective gear hung on pegs along the walls, evidence of the Academy's commitment to safe but realistic training. The changing rooms were Spartan but clean, reflecting Master Kim's belief that luxury was less important than functionality and respect for the training environment. Students were expected to maintain their uniforms, care for their equipment, and treat the dojang itself as a sacred space where ancient traditions were honored and modern skills were developed. The Academy's modest trophy case displayed awards won by students at regional tournaments, but more importantly, it held photos of former students who had gone on to college, military service, and successful careers, carrying with them the lessons they had learned on the mats of Dragon's Path. Marcus's transformation within the walls of the Academy had been gradual but profound, affecting not just his physical capabilities, but his entire understanding of what it meant to be strong. Master Kim had recognized immediately that Marcus was not motivated by aggression or a desire to dominate others, but rather by a deep need to prove to himself that he was not as helpless as the world seemed determined to make him feel. The Master had tailored his instruction accordingly, emphasizing the defensive aspects of Taekwondo while building Marcus's confidence through a carefully structured progression of challenges and achievements. The belt system provided Marcus with tangible evidence of his progress, each promotion marking not just his technical advancement, but his growing mastery of the mental disciplines that were equally important in Taekwondo. The white belt had represented his willingness to learn, the yellow belt his basic understanding of fundamental techniques, and each subsequent rank had built upon the foundation of the previous one. By the time he reached red belt, Marcus had developed not just the physical skills necessary to defend himself, but the mental clarity to assess threats, the emotional control to respond appropriately, and the spiritual grounding to find peace. Even in conflict, the techniques that Marcus had mastered were beautiful in their efficiency and devastating in their application. His kicks had developed the snap and power that could break boards with ease, while his hand techniques possessed the precision necessary for both attack and defense. The forms he had learned told stories of ancient conflicts and timeless principles, their movements flowing together like poetry written in motion. But perhaps most importantly, he had learned to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly when adrenaline flooded his system, and to find the still center within himself that no external force could disturb. The sparring sessions had taught Marcus lessons that no textbook could provide, showing him how to read an opponent's intentions in their posture and movement, how to create and exploit openings in their defense, and how to remain balanced and focused even when under attack. He had learned that size and strength were less important than timing and technique, that the loudest and most aggressive opponents were often the easiest to defeat, and that true confidence came not from the ability to hurt others, but from the knowledge that one could protect oneself and those who mattered. Master Kim had been particularly impressed with Marcus's development of what Koreans called nunchi, the ability to read social situations and respond appropriately. This skill, which was as much about emotional intelligence as it was about martial arts, had served Marcus well in navigating the complex social dynamics of both the academy and his daily life. He had learned to recognize the difference between students who genuinely wanted to improve and those who were simply looking for an outlet for their aggression, and he had developed the wisdom to know when to engage and when to step away from potential conflicts. The philosophy that underlay Marcus's training went far beyond simple self-defense, encompassing a complete worldview that emphasized personal responsibility, respect for others, and the cultivation of character that could withstand any test. Master Kim had taught him that a true martial artist was not someone who sought out fights, but someone who was prepared to protect what was important when all other options had been exhausted. This distinction was crucial to Marcus's development, providing him with a moral framework that allowed him to maintain his essential humanity, even as he developed the skills necessary to defend himself. The breathing techniques and meditation, practices that were integral to Taekwondo training, had given Marcus tools for managing stress and anxiety that served him well beyond the academy walls. He had learned to find his center even in the chaos of Riverside High's hallways, to remain calm when Tyler's crew was circling him like sharks, and to maintain his focus on long-term goals, even when short-term pain seemed overwhelming. These skills had probably saved his sanity during the worst periods of bullying, providing him with an inner refuge that no tormentor could access. As Marcus's junior year progressed and his black belt test approached, Master Kim had begun to prepare him not just for the physical and technical requirements of the examination, but for the responsibility that came with advanced rank in a traditional martial art. The master had explained that a black belt was not an end, but a beginning, marking the point at which a student had mastered the basic techniques well enough to begin truly learning the deeper aspects of the art. With rank came the obligation to help younger students, to represent the academy with honor, and to use one's skills wisely and sparingly. The approaching test had added another layer of pressure to Marcus's already complex life, requiring him to balance intensive training with his academic responsibilities while continuing to navigate the daily gauntlet of high school harassment. But it had also provided him with something to work toward, a goal that represented not just personal achievement, but validation of all the hours he had spent transforming his pain into power. Master Kim had warned him that the test would push him to his limits and beyond, requiring him to demonstrate not just his technical skills, but his mental fortitude and spiritual preparation. The irony of Marcus's situation was not lost on him. He had become a formidable fighter while remaining a victim, had developed the skills to defend himself while continuing to endure abuse, had found his strength while appearing weaker than ever to those who tormented him. This contradiction created a tension within him that grew stronger with each passing day, each new humiliation, each moment when he was forced to watch his mother worry about him while he pretended that everything was fine. The discipline that Master Kim had taught him was the only thing preventing that tension from exploding into violence. But even the strongest dam could only hold back so much pressure before it began to crack. The changing seasons in Millfield seemed to mirror the building tension in Marcus's life, the crisp autumn air carrying with it the promise of a harsh winter that would test everyone's endurance. The leaves that had provided color and beauty during the early part of the school year had fallen and been raked into piles that children played in before being loaded into trucks and hauled away, leaving behind bare branches that reached toward a sky that seemed to grow grayer with each passing day. The first frost had already touched the town, turning morning grass into fields of crystal that crunched underfoot and reminding everyone that nature's cycles continued regardless of human struggles and triumphs. The approaching winter break provided Marcus with something to look forward to, a 2-week respite from the daily ordeal of school that would allow him to focus entirely on his training and preparation for his black belt test. But first, he would have to survive the final weeks of the semester, a period when tensions at Riverside High always seemed to reach their peak as students faced final exams, college application deadlines, and the accumulated stress of months of academic and social pressure. Tyler Brooks and his crew were senior citizens of the school now, their graduation approaching and their window for inflicting maximum damage on their chosen targets rapidly closing. This knowledge made them more dangerous, not less, as they sought to cement their legacy of cruelty before moving on to whatever came next in their lives. Tyler Brooks stood at the apex of Riverside High's brutal social pyramid with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. At 18, he possessed the kind of natural charisma that could have been channeled into leadership if it hadn't been corrupted by an early understanding that cruelty was often more effective than kindness in getting what he wanted. His tall frame carried itself with the swagger of someone who had been told since childhood that he was destined for greatness, though the specifics of that greatness had never been clearly defined. His blonde hair was styled with the careful casualness that took significant time and expensive products to achieve, and his clothes bore the subtle labels that marked him as someone whose parents could afford to insulate him from the economic realities that shaped most of his classmates' lives. Tyler's family had built their reputation in Millfield through 3 generations of successful business ventures, starting with his great-grandfather's trucking company and evolving into a network of enterprises that included the largest construction firm in the county, 2 car dealerships, and a significant stake in the shopping complex where Dragon's Path Academy was located. The Brooks name carried weight in a town where names mattered, opening doors that remained firmly closed to families like the Chuns and ensuring that Tyler's transgressions were often overlooked or minimized by adults who understood the complex web of obligations and favors that kept small-town economies functioning. The sense of entitlement that permeated Tyler's worldview had been carefully cultivated by parents who believed that their son's success was not just probable but inevitable, a belief that had insulated him from the kind of character-building adversity that might have taught him empathy or humility. His father, Richard Brooks, was a man who measured worth in dollars and influence, teaching his son that the world was divided into those who took what they wanted and those who let things be taken from them. His mother, Patricia, was a former beauty queen whose own dreams had been sublimated into an obsessive focus on her son's achievements, real or imagined, and who had taught him that appearance and perception were often more important than substance. The Brooks family home was a monument to suburban success, a sprawling colonial that dominated its corner lot like a fortress announcing the owner's importance to anyone who passed by. The interior was decorated with the kind of expensive furniture and artwork that was meant to impress visitors rather than provide comfort, each room carefully staged to reinforce the family's position in Millfield's social hierarchy. Tyler's bedroom was larger than the entire living space that Marcus shared with his mother, filled with electronics and gaming equipment that represented more money than Elena Chun made in several months of hospital work. Tyler's academic performance at Riverside High was a masterclass in strategic mediocrity, achieving grades that were just high enough to avoid parental intervention while requiring minimal effort or genuine engagement with his studies. His teachers, many of whom had known his family for years, had learned to focus their attention on students who actually needed their help, understanding implicitly that Tyler's future was already secured through connections and family wealth rather than academic achievement. His college acceptance had been guaranteed since birth through legacy admissions and substantial donations, making his high school years feel more like a victory lap than a period of preparation for future challenges. The power that Tyler wielded over his classmates was both social and economic, derived from his family's influence in the community and his own carefully cultivated image as someone who could make life difficult for those who crossed him. Students who found themselves in Tyler's crosshairs often discovered that their parents' jobs could become uncertain, their families' business relationships could sour, and their own social standing could be destroyed through whisper campaigns and strategic exclusion. This network of influence extended beyond the school walls, making Tyler's approval or disapproval a factor that could affect entire families in a town where everyone was connected to everyone else through multiple degrees of separation. Derek Manning served as Tyler's primary enforcer, a role that suited both his physical capabilities and his limited imagination when it came to solving problems through means other than intimidation. Derek's family owned Manning Auto Parts, a business that had thrived during Millfield's industrial heyday, but now struggled to compete with online retailers and chain stores that could offer better prices and selection. The gradual decline of the family business had created a sense of desperation in Derek's home that manifested itself in his increasing willingness to use violence as a first resort rather than a last one. His father, Big Jim Manning, was a man whose own frustrations had turned him bitter and resentful, teaching his son that the world was a zero-sum game where someone else's success necessarily meant your own failure. Derek's physical presence was intimidating by design, his 6'3" frame carrying the kind of muscle that came from years of lifting heavy automotive parts and weekend cage fighting at venues that existed in the gray areas between legal and illegal. His red hair was kept in a military-style buzz cut that emphasized the aggressive angles of his face, while his arms bore tattoos that he had gotten at 16 using fake identification and his father's reluctant permission. His academic performance was even worse than Tyler's, but his family's business connections and his own willingness to use intimidation had earned him a football scholarship to a state school that was more interested in his ability to hit people than his ability to think. Jake Sullivan brought a different kind of cruelty to Tyler's crew, one that was more psychological than physical, but often more devastating in its long-term effects. Jake was small and slight, compensating for his physical limitations through a razor-sharp intellect that he weaponized against anyone who appeared vulnerable or different. His family had moved to Millfield from Chicago, when his father's accounting firm had been hired to manage the financial restructuring of several local businesses, making them relative newcomers in a town where family histories were measured in generations rather than years. This outsider status had taught Jake that acceptance could be earned through usefulness to those in power, leading him to develop his skills as Tyler's primary strategist and psychological warfare specialist. Jake's cruelty was surgical in its precision, targeting specific insecurities and fears with the kind of accuracy that could only come from careful observation and genuine malice. He was the one who researched his victims' family situations, discovered their embarrassing secrets, and crafted the rumors and lies that could destroy reputations and relationships with devastating efficiency. His academic performance was excellent, earning him acceptance to several prestigious universities where his intelligence could be properly channeled. But his high school years had taught him that knowledge was most valuable when it could be used to hurt others. Connor Walsh completed Tyler's inner circle, bringing to the group the kind of casual indifference to others, suffering that could only come from a lifetime of privilege so complete that he had never been forced to consider the consequences of his actions. Connor's family had made their fortune in real estate development, transforming farmland into shopping centers and subdivisions throughout the region, and their wealth insulated him from the economic pressures that shaped most of his classmates' lives. His bedroom closet contained more expensive clothes than most families in Millfield owned. His driveway held a car that cost more than many people's annual salaries, and his college fund contained enough money to buy a house in most parts of the country. Connor's participation in Tyler's campaigns of harassment was motivated less by active malice than by boredom, and the casual assumption that other people's feelings were less important than his own entertainment. He was the kind of person who could inflict serious emotional damage on someone and then forget about it completely within hours, not because he was particularly cruel, but because he had never been taught to consider other people as fully real in the way that he was real. His parents had raised him to believe that his comfort and happiness were the primary considerations in any situation, creating a worldview that was both narcissistic and genuinely bewildering to those who encountered it. The dynamic between these four young men was complex, built on a foundation of mutual benefit and shared culpability that kept them bound together despite their individual differences. Tyler provided the vision and leadership, Derek supplied the physical intimidation, Jake crafted the psychological attacks, and Connor offered the resources and social connections that made their campaigns possible. Each of them understood implicitly that their power was collective rather than individual, that their ability to dominate others depended on maintaining their unity and supporting each other's actions, regardless of their personal feelings about specific situations. The escalation of their campaign against Marcus Chun had been gradual but purposeful, each incident carefully designed to test the boundaries of what they could accomplish without triggering serious intervention from school authorities or law enforcement. They had learned through experience that sustained psychological pressure was more effective than dramatic physical attacks, that a pattern of small humiliations could be more devastating than a single major assault, and that witnesses who might intervene in an obvious case of violence would often look the other way when the cruelty was subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. The group's tactics had evolved over their years at Riverside High, incorporating lessons learned from previous campaigns and adapting to the changing environment of social media and smartphone cameras that made traditional bullying more risky but also opened up new avenues for harassment. They had developed sophisticated methods for avoiding detection, using encrypted messaging apps to coordinate their activities, establishing alibis through carefully planned schedules, and leveraging their social connections to ensure that any reports of their behavior would be filtered through sympathetic adults who understood the importance of protecting promising young men from the consequences of youthful indiscretions. Their selection of Marcus as a primary target had been almost inevitable, given his combination of visible vulnerability, social isolation, and ethnic difference that made him stand out in a predominantly white school environment. Tyler's instincts for identifying weakness were highly developed, honed through years of practice and refined through observation of what kinds of victims would generate the most entertainment while presenting the least risk of retaliation or intervention. Marcus's quiet demeanor and obvious attempts to avoid confrontation had marked him as someone who would absorb punishment without fighting back, while his family's economic struggles and immigrant background ensured that he would have limited resources for seeking help or justice. The psychological profile that Tyler had constructed of Marcus was surprisingly sophisticated for someone his age, incorporating observations about family dynamics, cultural background, and personal insecurities. That revealed a genuine talent for manipulation that could have been directed toward more constructive purposes. Tyler understood that Marcus's greatest fear was not physical pain, but the prospect of disappointing his mother or jeopardizing his academic future. Insights that allowed the harassment to be calibrated for maximum psychological impact while minimizing the risk of triggering a violent response that might bring unwanted attention from authority figures. The group's methods had become increasingly sophisticated as they recognized that Marcus was more resilient than many of their previous targets, requiring more creative and persistent approaches to achieve the level of submission and humiliation that they considered satisfactory. They had moved beyond simple physical intimidation to incorporate social media harassment, academic sabotage, and psychological warfare tactics that were designed to isolate Marcus from potential sources of support while gradually wearing down his mental defenses through constant stress and anxiety. The decision to escalate their campaign to include physical assault with the hot metal ruler had emerged from Tyler's growing frustration with Marcus's refusal to break completely under the pressure they had been applying. The branding idea combined elements of humiliation, physical pain, and symbolic dominance that appealed to Tyler's sense of dramatic cruelty, while also serving as a sort of graduation exercise for the group as they prepared to leave high school behind. The plan was elaborate enough to demonstrate their sophistication while being simple enough to execute without requiring extensive preparation or coordination. The choice of location for their planned assault reflected careful consideration of practical factors like privacy, escape routes, and plausible deniability, while the timing was designed to take advantage of the reduced supervision that characterized the final weeks of the semester when teachers were focused on grading and administrative tasks rather than monitoring student behavior. Tyler had identified an unused chemistry classroom in the basement of the science wing that was perfect for their purposes. offering complete privacy while remaining technically within the school building where their presence could be explained, if necessary. The group's confidence in their ability to carry out this plan without consequences was based on years of successful harassment, campaigns that had never resulted in serious punishment, creating a sense of invulnerability that was both their greatest strength and their most dangerous weakness. They had become so accustomed to operating without opposition that they had lost the ability to accurately assess risks or anticipate responses that fell outside their previous experience. Their understanding of Marcus was comprehensive but fatally flawed, based on observation of his public persona without any awareness of the private transformation that had been taking place in the modest dojang across town. The weapons that Tyler's group planned to use in their assault were both symbolic and practical, chosen for their ability to inflict lasting physical and psychological damage while serving as permanent reminders of the group's power and Marcus's helplessness. The metal ruler had been selected specifically for its associations with academic authority and punishment, while the plan to heat it with a Bunsen burner added elements of premeditation and extreme cruelty that would distinguish this attack from simple schoolyard violence. The branding itself was intended to mark Marcus permanently as their victim, creating a physical scar that would serve as a constant reminder of his defeat and their dominance. The psychological preparation the group underwent in the days leading up to their planned assault revealed the sophisticated planning and coordination that characterized their most serious campaigns. Each member had specific responsibilities and backup plans, while their cover stories and alibis had been carefully rehearsed to ensure consistency in case of investigation. They had researched the physical process of branding, the likely medical consequences of their actions, and the legal implications of their plan, demonstrating a level of premeditation that would have shocked adults, who continued to view them as essentially good kids who sometimes made poor choices. The group's anticipation of their planned assault had created a sense of excitement and nervous energy that was visible to anyone who knew what to look for, though the faculty and staff at Riverside High were too overwhelmed with their own responsibilities to notice the subtle changes in behavior that might have warned them of impending violence. Tyler had become more animated and confident. Derek had started working out more intensively in preparation for any physical resistance. Jake had been researching the psychological effects of torture and mutilation, and Connor had been making arrangements to ensure that his parents would provide legal protection if necessary. The failure of school authorities to recognize the warning signs was not due to incompetence or indifference, but rather to the systematic underfunding and understaffing that characterized public education in communities like Millfield. Teachers were responsible for too many students. Counselors were overwhelmed with paperwork and administrative duties, and administrators were focused on meeting state requirements and managing budgets rather than preventing violence between students. The culture of the school had evolved to treat bullying as an inevitable part of adolescent development, rather than a serious problem requiring intervention, creating an environment where predators like Tyler's group could operate with relative impunity. The broader community context that enabled Tyler's behavior extended far beyond the walls of Riverside High, encompassing social and economic structures that prioritized the preservation of existing power relationships over the protection of vulnerable individuals. Millfield's business community understood that challenging the Brooks family could have serious economic consequences, while the town's political leadership recognized that maintaining good relationships with influential families was essential for securing the investment and development that kept local government functioning. This network of mutual dependence created a system where accountability was selective and justice was often subordinated to practical considerations about maintaining social stability. The approaching confrontation between Tyler's group and Marcus represented more than just a conflict between individual students. It was a collision between two entirely different worldviews about power, justice, and the proper relationship between strength and responsibility. Tyler's group operated from the assumption that might made right, that their superior resources and social connections gave them the natural authority to dominate those they perceived as weaker or different. Marcus, shaped by his mother's teachings and Master Kim's philosophy, believed that true strength came from protecting others rather than exploiting them, that power was a responsibility rather than a privilege, and that justice was worth fighting for even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The irony that neither Tyler nor his crew could possibly understand was that their planned victim had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation, not because he had anticipated their specific plan, but because Master Kim had taught him that bullies always escalated their behavior until they were stopped by force. The old master had explained that predators like Tyler tested boundaries constantly, pushing harder and harder until they encountered resistance that convinced them to seek easier targets elsewhere. Marcus's years of training had been preparation for this moment, though he had hoped against hope that it would never come. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything for everyone involved, though only one side understood the true nature of what was about to unfold. Tyler's group approached their planned assault with the confidence of predators who had never encountered serious resistance, while Marcus remained unaware of their specific intentions, but spiritually and physically prepared to defend himself when all other options had been exhausted. The collision between these two forces would reveal truths about power, justice, and the consequences of choice that would echo far beyond the basement classroom where it was destined to occur. The December air carried the bitter promise of Ohio's harshest season as Marcus Chun made his way through the emptying corridors of Riverside High School on what would prove to be the most significant afternoon of his young life. The heating system struggled against the penetrating cold that seeped through ancient windows and poorly insulated walls, creating pockets of warmth and chill that seemed to mirror the unpredictable emotional climate that had settled over the school during the final weeks before winter break. Most students had already departed for the day, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to intensify as semester deadlines approached and tensions reached their breaking point. Marcus had stayed late to complete a makeup exam in advanced chemistry, a subject that came naturally to him despite the constant distractions created by Tyler's relentless harassment campaign. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had offered him the opportunity to retake the test after his original attempt had been sabotaged by Jake Sullivan, who had somehow managed to access Marcus's locker and destroy his study materials the night before the original exam date. The makeup session had gone well, providing Marcus with a rare moment of academic satisfaction in what had been an increasingly difficult semester, though he remained unaware that his extended presence in the building had provided Tyler's crew with the perfect opportunity they had been waiting for. The chemistry lab where Marcus had taken his exam was located in the basement of the science wing, an area of the school that was rarely frequented during after-school hours and provided the kind of isolation that predators like Tyler Brooks had learned to exploit. The basement corridors were dimly lit by aging fluorescent fixtures that created pools of sickly yellow light separated by stretches of shadow, while the concrete walls seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it, creating an atmosphere that felt removed from the busy world above. It was in this underground maze of empty classrooms and forgotten storage areas that Tyler had planned to deliver his final, devastating message to the quiet Asian boy who had somehow managed to resist 3 years of increasingly sophisticated psychological warfare. The plan that Tyler's crew had developed was elegant in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications, representing the culmination of years of experience in terrorizing their classmates while avoiding serious consequences. They had identified an unused chemistry classroom that contained all the equipment necessary for their purposes, including Bunsen burners that could heat metal to temperatures sufficient for branding human flesh, while the room's location ensured that any screams would be muffled by the surrounding concrete and the building's general emptiness. The timing was perfect, with most faculty members having departed for faculty meetings or personal obligations, leaving the basement level effectively unmonitored during the crucial hour when they planned to carry out their assault. Tyler had spent considerable time researching the psychological and physical effects of branding, understanding that the procedure would create not just temporary pain but permanent scarring that would serve as a lasting reminder of his power and Marcus's helplessness. The design he had chosen was simple but symbolic, the letters L and Z for loser and sheep, terms that Tyler felt accurately described Marcus's place in the social hierarchy of Riverside High. The branding would be applied to Marcus's forearm, an area that would be visible during warmer months, but could be concealed during winter, allowing the psychological impact to be controlled and maximized for Tyler's benefit. Derek Manning had been assigned the task of physically restraining Marcus during the procedure, a role that excited him because it would finally allow him to use his superior size and strength for something more satisfying than simple intimidation. Derek had been fantasizing about this moment for weeks, imagining the look of terror and helplessness in Marcus's eyes as he realized that his years of passive resistance had finally been overcome by superior force. Derek's own frustrations with his family's declining business and his academic struggles had created a reservoir of anger that he was eager to unleash on someone who represented everything he resented about his own limitations and failures. Jake Sullivan's contribution to the plan involved documenting the entire procedure with his smartphone, creating a permanent record that could be used for future blackmail, while also serving as proof of the group's dominance over their chosen victim. Jake understood that the psychological impact of the branding would be amplified if Marcus knew that video evidence existed of his humiliation, evidence that could be shared with classmates, posted online, or used to ensure his continued compliance with whatever demands Tyler might make in the future. The documentation would also serve as insurance against retaliation, since any attempt by Marcus to report the incident would result in the video being widely distributed. Connor Walsh's role was primarily logistical, serving as a lookout and providing the group with an escape route if their activities were discovered by faculty or security personnel. His family's influence would also be crucial if legal complications arose, since his parents had the resources and connections necessary to minimize any consequences that might threaten the group's futures. Connor's casual indifference to the suffering they were about to inflict was perhaps more chilling than Tyler's calculated cruelty or Derek's angry violence, representing a level of moral emptiness that made him capable of participating in torture without experiencing any emotional response beyond mild curiosity about the victim's reactions. The metal ruler that would serve as their branding iron had been specially prepared for the occasion, its surface cleaned and polished to ensure maximum heat transfer, while its handle had been wrapped with electrical tape to protect Tyler's hands. During the procedure, the ruler itself was an old-fashioned steel model that Tyler had purchased specifically for this purpose, understanding that the substantial mass of metal would retain heat longer than modern plastic alternatives, while also providing the symbolic connection to academic authority that made the choice particularly appropriate for their victim. The heating process would take several minutes, providing time for psychological intimidation while ensuring that the metal reached temperature sufficient to create permanent scarring. Marcus emerged from Mrs. Rodriguez's classroom with a sense of cautious optimism, confident that his performance on the makeup exam would restore his grade point average, while also demonstrating his resilience in the face of ongoing harassment. He gathered his books methodically, checking to ensure that he had completed all necessary assignments before the winter break, while mentally reviewing his schedule for the evening's training session at Dragon's Path Academy. Master Kim had been preparing him intensively for his black belt examination, which was scheduled for the first week of January, and Marcus was eager to continue working on the advanced techniques that would be required for successful completion of the test. The corridors leading from the chemistry lab to the main stairwell were deserted, creating an eerie atmosphere that reminded Marcus of horror movies he had watched with his mother during their rare evenings of shared entertainment. His footsteps echoed against the polished concrete floors, while his breath formed small clouds in the inadequately heated air, visible reminders of the building's age and the district's limited resources for maintenance and utilities. The familiar weight of his backpack provided comfort as he navigated the maze of hallways, though he remained alert to the possibility of encountering Tyler's crew in these isolated areas where teachers and administrators rarely ventured. Ambush came without warning as Marcus rounded a corner near the abandoned physics lab. Tyler and his crew, emerging from their concealment with the practiced coordination of predators who had refined their techniques through years of successful hunting. Derek's massive hands seized Marcus's shoulders before he could react, lifting him off his feet and slamming him against the concrete wall with enough force to knock the wind from his lungs and send his books scattering across the floor. Tyler's voice was calm and conversational as he explained what was about to happen, his tone suggesting that this was simply another routine interaction rather than a premeditated assault that could result in permanent injury. The abandoned classroom that served as their destination was only 50 feet away, but the journey felt endless as Derek dragged Marcus through the doorway while Jake and Connor secured the area and activated the equipment they had prepared earlier. The Bunsen burner roared to life with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the enclosed space, its blue flame providing the only illumination in a room where the overhead lights had been deliberately disabled to prevent observation from outside. Tyler held up the metal ruler with the reverence of a priest displaying a sacred artifact, explaining in detail how the branding process would work while Marcus struggled against Derek's iron grip. The psychological torture that preceded the physical assault was as carefully orchestrated as the assault itself, designed to break down Marcus's mental defenses while maximizing his terror and helplessness. Tyler spoke conversationally about the permanent nature of the scars he was about to create, describing how they would affect Marcus's future relationships, career prospects, and self-image in terms that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of long-term psychological manipulation. Jake contributed periodic observations about the filming process, ensuring that Marcus understood that his humiliation would be preserved forever, while Connor provided updates about the heating progress with the enthusiasm of someone describing a particularly interesting science experiment. The moment when Tyler judged the metal ruler to be sufficiently heated marked the transition from psychological to physical torture, though Marcus's response was so unexpected and devastating that Tyler never actually completed his intended assault. As Derek positioned Marcus's arm for branding and Tyler approached with the glowing metal, something fundamental shifted in Marcus's consciousness. Years of training and suppressed anger finally finding their outlet in a display of controlled violence that transformed the victim into the victor in the space of heartbeats. Marcus's first movement was subtle, a slight shift in his weight that Derek interpreted as resignation rather than preparation for counterattack. The knee strike that followed was delivered with the precision and power that could only come from years of dedicated training, catching Derek in the solar plexus with enough force to double him over and release his grip on Marcus's shoulders. The follow-up elbow strike to Derek's temple dropped him to the floor unconscious before Tyler could fully process what was happening, while Jake fumbled with his phone and Connor stood frozen in shock at the sudden reversal of their carefully planned scenario. Tyler's reaction to Derek's incapacitation was immediate and predictable, rushing forward with the heated ruler in an attempt to complete his branding mission before Marcus could escape or further resist their assault. The attack was clumsy and telegraphed, exactly the kind of wild charge that Master Kim had taught Marcus to expect from untrained opponents who relied on intimidation rather than skill. Marcus's response was a textbook demonstration of Taekwondo defensive principles, a sidestep that took him out of Tyler's path while positioning him for a devastating counterattack that utilized his opponent's momentum and aggression against Him. The spinning heel kick that Marcus delivered to Tyler's ribs was executed with perfect form and maximum power, lifting the larger boy off his feet and sending him crashing into the laboratory tables with a sound that echoed through the basement. Like thunder, Tyler's impact with the furniture was devastating, his ribs cracking audibly while the heated ruler flew from his hand to clatter harmlessly across the floor, its orange glow fading as it cooled in the shadow of overturned chairs and scattered equipment. Tyler's scream of pain and shock was cut short as his head struck the edge of a table, leaving him unconscious and bleeding while Marcus turned his attention to the remaining members of the crew. Jake Sullivan's attempt to continue filming the assault while simultaneously calling for help proved to be a fatal tactical error, dividing his attention between multiple objectives while facing an opponent who had been trained to exploit exactly such moments of distraction and confusion. Marcus's approach was measured and deliberate, his movements flowing with the kind of fluid grace that marked a true martial artist, while Jake backed against the wall with his phone held out like a shield that might somehow protect him from the consequences of his participation in attempted torture. The axe kick that Marcus used to disable Jake was one of his most practiced techniques, delivered with the kind of precision that could split boards in demonstration while being carefully controlled to avoid permanent injury in sparring. Jake's phone shattered as Marcus's foot drove it back into his face, breaking his nose and knocking him unconscious, while simultaneously destroying the video evidence that might have been used to blackmail or humiliate him in the future. The symbolic justice of destroying Jake's recording device with the same technique was not lost on Marcus, who had learned from Master Kim that the universe often provided its own form of balance for those patient enough to wait for the proper moment. Connor Walsh's response to the systematic destruction of his companions was predictable given his sheltered background and complete lack of experience with real violence or consequences for his actions. His attempts to escape the classroom were hampered by his own panic and the furniture that Tyler's impact had scattered across the floor, while his threats about his family's influence and legal connections fell on ears that had been deafened by years of similar threats that had never materialized into actual protection from harassment and abuse. Marcus's final technique was reserved for Connor, not because he represented the greatest physical threat, but because his casual indifference to others' suffering represented the kind of moral emptiness that Master Kim had taught him to despise above all other character flaws. The round kick that Marcus delivered to Connor's midsection was measured and controlled, designed to incapacitate rather than seriously injure, though the psychological impact was devastating, as Connor realized that his wealth and connections provided no protection against someone who had been pushed beyond the breaking point. The silence that followed the brief but decisive confrontation was broken only by the sound of Marcus's controlled breathing and the groans of his defeated tormentors as they began to regain consciousness. The basement classroom had been transformed from a chamber of intended torture into a demonstration of what happened when predators finally encountered someone capable of defending himself, while the scattered equipment and overturned furniture bore witness to the explosive reversal of power that had occurred in less than 2 minutes of actual combat. Marcus stood in the center of the destruction with the calm composure that Master Kim had taught him to maintain in all situations, his uniform rumpled but his spirit intact, while Tyler's crew struggled to comprehend how their carefully planned assault had been transformed into their own humiliation and defeat. The heated ruler lay cooling on the floor nearby, its intended purpose forever unfulfilled, while serving as a reminder of how close they had come to committing an act of violence that would have changed all their lives forever. The aftermath of the confrontation revealed the true character of each participant as they faced the consequences of their choices and actions. Tyler's first words upon regaining consciousness were threats about legal retaliation and family influence, though his voice lacked the confidence that had characterized his previous interactions with Marcus, while Derek simply held his aching Hedden tried to understand how someone half his size had managed to defeat him so easily. Jake's primary concern was the destruction of his phone and the loss of video, evidence that might have protected him from consequences, while Connor alternated between whimpering about his injuries and demanding that Marcus be arrested for assault. Marcus's response to their continued threats and complaints was measured and philosophical, drawing upon years of training in both martial arts and conflict resolution to address each of their concerns with the kind of calm rationality that was more devastating than any physical technique could have been. He explained that their assault on him had been witnessed by the building's security cameras, which had recorded their ambush and attempted branding, while their own statements about filming the procedure had been captured by the same system. That would now provide evidence of premeditated assault with a deadly weapon. The legal implications of their actions were far more serious than Tyler's crew had anticipated, involving charges that could result in adult prosecution and permanent criminal records that would affect their college admissions, scholarship opportunities, and future career prospects. The heated metal ruler constituted a dangerous weapon under Ohio law, while the planning and coordination they had demonstrated elevated their assault from simple battery to aggravated assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm. Their documentation of the assault plan through text messages and social media posts provided prosecutors with clear evidence of premeditation, while their own statements about the intended permanent scarring demonstrated the kind of malicious intent that could result in significant prison sentences. Marcus's decision to report the incident to school authorities and law enforcement was motivated not by revenge but by his understanding that predators like Tyler would continue to escalate their behavior until they were stopped by consequences that they could not ignore or escape. Master Kim had taught him that true strength sometimes required making difficult choices that served the greater good rather than personal satisfaction, and that protecting future victims was more important than avoiding the complications that would inevitably arise from taking a stand against established power structures. The investigation that followed revealed the extensive nature of Tyler's harassment campaign and the systematic failure of school authorities to address a pattern of behavior that had been escalating for years. The digital evidence recovered from the crew's phones and social media accounts documented dozens of incidents involving multiple victims, creating a comprehensive picture of organized bullying that had been allowed to continue unchecked due to the influence and connections that the perpetrators' families enjoyed within the community. The school district's response was swift and comprehensive, involving immediate suspension of Tyler's crew pending criminal investigation, while also implementing new policies designed to prevent similar incidents in the future. The basement area where the assault had occurred was secured as a crime scene, while surveillance footage was preserved as evidence, and counseling services were offered to all students who had been affected by the systematic harassment that the investigation had revealed. Tyler Brooks found himself facing adult charges for assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit bodily harm, and violation of civil rights, while his family's influence proved inadequate to protect him from the consequences of his actions. His college acceptance was revoked upon notification of the charges, while his father's business relationships began to suffer as community members learned the details of his son's behavior and the family's attempts to minimize its significance. The Brooks family's reputation, built over 3 generations, began to crumble as the true extent of Tyler's actions became public knowledge. Derek Manning's athletic scholarship was terminated immediately upon his arrest, while his father's business faced boycotts from customers who refused to support a family that had raised a son capable of participating in attempted torture. Derek's own future prospects were dramatically reduced by his criminal record and the violent reputation that followed him throughout the community, teaching him too late that actions had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate moment of gratification they provided. Jake Sullivan's acceptance to prestigious universities was withdrawn as admissions offices learned of his involvement in organized harassment and assault, while his carefully constructed image as an academic achiever was destroyed by evidence of his role in psychologically tormenting vulnerable classmates. His family's status as relative newcomers to Millfield worked against them as community members, who had never fully accepted them, now had concrete reasons to exclude them from social and business networks. Connor Walsh's family wealth provided him with the best legal representation available, but could not protect him from the social consequences of his actions or the criminal record that would follow him throughout his life. His parents' attempts to minimize his role in the assault were undermined by evidence showing his full participation in planning and executing the attack, while their efforts to blame other members of the crew only served to highlight their son's moral emptiness and their own failure as parents. Marcus Chun's transformation from victim to victor became a source of inspiration throughout Riverside High School and the broader Millfield community, demonstrating that systematic harassment could be overcome through preparation, courage, and the willingness to stand up for oneself when all other options had been exhausted. His black belt examination the following month was attended by dozens of supporters who had learned of his story, while Master Kim's academy experienced a surge in enrollment from students who wanted to develop the same kind of quiet confidence that had enabled Marcus to defend himself so effectively. The viral video of the confrontation, recorded by the school security system rather than Jake's phone, spread across social media platforms with a speed that surprised everyone involved, generating millions of views and thousands of comments from people who saw in Marcus's story a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of systematic bullying. The video's impact extended far beyond Millfield, inspiring anti-bullying programs and self-defense training initiatives in schools across the country, while demonstrating the power of preparation and training in overcoming seemingly impossible odds. Elena Chun's pride in her son's courage was tempered by concern about the attention and potential consequences that his actions might generate, though she ultimately recognized that his decision to defend himself represented the culmination of everything she had tried to teach him about standing up for what was right. Her own status in the community was enhanced by her son's demonstration of character under pressure, while her nursing certification program benefited from scholarships and support provided by community members who wanted to honor the family that had stood up to entrenched privilege and corruption. Master Kim's philosophy about the proper use of martial arts training was vindicated by Marcus's measured response to extreme provocation, demonstrating that years of discipline and character development could enable someone to use violence precisely and proportionally when peaceful options had been exhausted. The Academy's reputation was enhanced by the demonstration of its teaching methods, while Master Kim himself became a sought-after speaker at conferences and seminars focused on character development and conflict resolution. The long-term impact of the confrontation extended far beyond the immediate participants, creating changes in school policies, community attitudes, and individual behavior that would influence Millfield for years to come. The incident served as a watershed moment that forced residents to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, justice, and the consequences of allowing systematic harassment to continue unchecked, while also demonstrating the power of preparation and training in overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The courthouse steps in downtown Millfield had seen their share of drama over the decades, but rarely had they hosted such a diverse crowd as the one that gathered on the cold February morning when Tyler Brooks and his crew were scheduled for sentencing. Marcus Chun stood with his mother Elena and Master Kim near the bottom of the stone steps, his black belt tied around his waist, serving as a quiet reminder of the journey that had brought them all to this moment. The belt had been earned just 3 weeks earlier in a ceremony that had drawn more spectators than any previous promotion at Dragon's Path Academy, transforming what should have been a private milestone into a community celebration of resilience and justice. The months following the basement confrontation had brought changes to Millfield that no one could have anticipated, rippling outward from Riverside High School like stones dropped into still water. The school district had implemented comprehensive anti-bullying policies that included mandatory reporting protocols, regular training for faculty and staff, and a zero-tolerance approach to harassment that prioritized victim protection over institutional reputation. The basement areas of all district buildings had been redesigned and equipped with enhanced lighting and security measures, ensuring that isolated spaces could no longer serve as hunting grounds for predators seeking vulnerable targets. Marcus's transformation from invisible victim to reluctant hero had been documented by local and national media outlets, his story resonating with audiences who saw in his experience a reflection of their own struggles with powerlessness and injustice. The interview requests had been overwhelming at first, with producers and journalists eager to explore the narrative of the quiet, martial artist who had defeated his tormentors through skill rather than rage. Elena had carefully managed these opportunities, accepting only those that focused on the broader issues of bullying prevention and character development rather than sensationalizing the violence that had occurred in the basement classroom. The legal proceedings had unfolded with the methodical precision that characterized serious criminal cases, each hearing revealing new details about the systematic harassment that Tyler's crew had inflicted on multiple victims over several years. The digital evidence recovered from their devices painted a disturbing picture of calculated cruelty, with detailed plans for psychological manipulation and physical intimidation that demonstrated a level of sophistication that shocked even experienced prosecutors. The attempted branding incident represented only the culmination of a campaign that had terrorized dozens of students while school authorities remained either unaware or unwilling to intervene effectively. Tyler Brooks had initially attempted to maintain his innocence, claiming that the basement incident was simply a prank that had gotten out of hand, and that Marcus had overreacted to harmless teasing. His family's legal team had worked tirelessly to minimize the charges and shift blame to other members of the crew, arguing that Tyler's leadership role had been exaggerated and that his actions were the result of peer pressure rather than malicious intent. These efforts collapsed when prosecutors presented recordings of Tyler's own voice, describing his plans for branding Marcus, audio captured by the school's security system during the crew's preparation for their assault. The community response to the revelations about Tyler's behavior had been swift and unforgiving, with many residents expressing shock at the extent of the harassment, while others admitted that they had suspected problems but chosen not to investigate or intervene. The Brooks family's business empire began to crumble as customers and partners distanced themselves from the scandal, while Richard Brooks found himself facing his own legal challenges as investigations revealed questionable business practices that had been overlooked when his family's reputation remained intact. Patricia Brooks retreated from public life entirely, her social standing destroyed by the association with her son's crimes. Derek Manning's plea bargain had included cooperation with prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges, his testimony providing crucial evidence about the planning and coordination that had characterized the crew's activities. His family's auto parts business had been forced to close after losing key suppliers and customers, while Derek himself faced the prospect of serving time in juvenile detention, followed by years of probation and community service. His athletic dreams had been permanently shattered, his scholarship revoked, and his reputation so damaged that no coach would consider him for any team at any level. Jake Sullivan's sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation had actually worked against him during the legal proceedings, as prosecutors used his own research and planning documents to demonstrate the calculated nature of his participation in the harassment campaign. His academic achievements meant nothing in the face of evidence showing his role in systematically destroying other students' mental health, while his family's attempts to portray him as a misguided follower were undermined by clear evidence of his strategic contributions to the crew's operations. His college acceptances had been rescinded permanently, leaving him to contemplate a future that bore no resemblance to the privileged path he had expected to follow. Connor Walsh's family had none of the most aggressive legal defense, hiring a team of attorneys who challenged every aspect of the prosecution's case while simultaneously conducting their own investigation into Marcus's background and training. Their efforts to portray Marcus as the true aggressor had backfired spectacularly when the security footage clearly showed the crew's ambush and attempted assault, while their attempts to minimize Connor's role were contradicted by his own statements and digital communications. The Walsh family's real estate empire had suffered significant losses as the scandal affected their ability to secure financing and municipal approvals for development projects. The transformation of Riverside High School had extended far beyond policy changes and security improvements, encompassing a fundamental shift in the social dynamics that had previously allowed systematic harassment to flourish unchecked. Students who had previously remained silent about bullying began to report incidents and support victims, while the administration implemented peer mediation programs and restorative justice practices that focused on healing rather than punishment. The basement incident had served as a wake-up call that forced everyone to confront the toxic culture that had developed over years of neglect and willful blindness. Marcus's academic performance had actually improved in the months following his confrontation with Tyler's crew, freed from the constant stress and anxiety that had plagued him throughout his high school career. His teachers noted increased participation and confidence in class discussions, while his standardized test scores reflected the intellectual potential that had been suppressed by years of psychological trauma. College recruiters had begun to take notice of his achievements, offering scholarships that would provide opportunities his family had never dared to hope for. The Dragon's Path Taekwondo Academy had experienced unprecedented growth as parents throughout Millfield and surrounding communities sought training for their children, inspired by Marcus's example and eager to provide their kids with the skills and confidence necessary to defend themselves against harassment and violence. Master Kim had been forced to hire additional instructors and expand the facility to accommodate the demand, while maintaining the high standards and philosophical foundations that had produced Marcus's remarkable transformation from victim to victor. Elena Chun's nursing career had flourished as community leaders and healthcare administrators recognized her strength and dedication in raising a son who exemplified the values of courage and integrity that were desperately needed. Their profession. Her certification had been completed ahead of schedule with the help of scholarships and support from residents who wanted to honor her family's contribution to positive change in their community. The financial pressures that had dominated her life for years had been significantly reduced, allowing her to focus on her career and her relationship with Marcus without the constant worry about basic survival. The media attention surrounding Marcus's story had gradually evolved from sensationalized coverage of the basement confrontation to thoughtful exploration of the broader issues of bullying prevention, character development, and the role of martial arts training in building confidence and self-discipline. Documentary filmmakers had approached the family about creating a comprehensive examination of their journey, while educators and psychologists had begun incorporating Marcus's experience into training programs and research studies focused on resilience and post-traumatic growth. Master Kim's philosophy about the proper use of martial arts had been validated by Marcus's measured response to extreme provocation, demonstrating that years of character development and spiritual training could enable someone to use violence precisely and appropriately when peaceful alternatives had been exhausted. The old master had become a respected voice in discussions about youth development and conflict resolution. His insights sought by educators, law enforcement professionals, and community leaders who recognized the wisdom embedded in traditional martial arts training. The ripple effects of the basement incident had extended into the broader Millfield community, sparking conversations about privilege, accountability, and the responsibility that comes with influence and resources. Local business leaders had implemented new policies and training programs designed to prevent the kind of toxic behavior that had been tolerated or ignored when it was exhibited by the children of powerful families. The incident had served as a catalyst for examining and addressing systemic problems that had been allowed to fester beneath the surface of small-town respectability. The sentencing hearing itself was conducted with the solemnity appropriate to cases involving serious crimes against vulnerable victims, with Judge Patricia Martinez delivering remarks that emphasized the lasting impact of harassment and violence on individuals and communities alike. Tyler Brooks received the maximum sentence allowed under juvenile law, including detention, extensive counseling, and years of supervised probation that would extend into his adult life. His co-conspirators received sentences proportional to their roles in the conspiracy, with all four facing restrictions that would limit their opportunities and monitor their behavior for years to come. Marcus's victim impact statement was delivered with the same calm composure that had characterized his response to years of harassment, focusing not on revenge or punishment, but on the importance of accountability and the hope that his tormentors might eventually understand the harm they had caused and work to make amends through positive contributions to their communities. His words carried the weight of hard-won wisdom and the authority that comes from having faced genuine adversity and emerged stronger rather than bitter. The aftermath of the sentencing brought a sense of closure to the legal proceedings while opening new chapters in the lives of everyone involved, with Marcus and his family looking forward to a future filled with possibilities that had seemed impossible just months earlier. College acceptance letters had begun arriving, offering scholarships and opportunities that would allow Marcus to pursue his dreams of becoming a teacher and counselor himself, dedicated to helping other young people navigate the challenges of adolescence with greater confidence and support than he had received. The transformation of Millfield itself continued to unfold in ways both large and small, with residents reporting increased willingness to intervene in situations involving harassment or injustice, while schools throughout the region implemented programs inspired by Marcus's experience and Master Kim's teachings. The basement classroom where the confrontation had occurred was converted into a meditation and conflict resolution space, serving as a daily reminder that violence should always be a last resort while ensuring that students had access to peaceful alternatives for addressing their problems and conflicts. Elena Chun's pride in her son's courage and character was matched by her gratitude for the community support that had enabled their family to heal and grow stronger through their ordeal, while her own career advancement provided new opportunities to help other families facing similar challenges. The apartment that had once felt like a prison of poverty and limitation had been transformed into a launching pad for futures filled with promise and potential, though the lessons learned through hardship remained embedded in their daily practices and long-term planning. Master Kim's Academy continued to serve as a beacon for young people seeking not just physical training but the kind of character development and philosophical grounding that could sustain them through life's inevitable challenges and conflicts. The waiting list for enrollment had grown to several months, while the master himself had begun developing a curriculum that could be replicated in other communities facing similar problems with youth violence and social dysfunction. The security footage from the basement confrontation had become a case study in martial arts schools and self-defense programs throughout the country, demonstrating the effectiveness of traditional training methods while highlighting the importance of mental preparation and character development in determining how physical skills are ultimately applied. Marcus's precise and measured response to extreme provocation had become a template for instructors seeking to teach students about appropriate use of force and the moral responsibilities that accompany martial arts knowledge. The long-term impact of Marcus's story extended far beyond the boundaries of Millfield, inspiring anti-bullying initiatives and character education programs in schools throughout Ohio and beyond, while his example provided hope and encouragement to countless young people facing their own struggles with harassment and social isolation. The message that strength comes from preparation, character, and the willingness to stand up for what is right had resonated with audiences across generational and cultural boundaries, proving that courage and integrity remain powerful forces for positive change in any community willing to embrace them. Years later, Marcus would return to Riverside High School as a guest speaker, his presence serving as a living reminder that transformation is possible for anyone willing to commit to the difficult work of building character and developing the skills necessary to protect themselves and others from those who would exploit weakness and vulnerability. His story had become part of the school's institutional memory, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked privilege and an inspiring example of what can be accomplished when preparation meets opportunity and courage overcomes fear. Basement classroom, where everything had changed, still bore subtle scars from the confrontation, though it now served students seeking peaceful resolution to their conflicts rather than providing a venue for violence and intimidation. The space had been transformed from a symbol of institutional failure into a testament to the possibility of redemption and positive change, demonstrating that even the darkest moments can become foundations for building something better and stronger than what came before. 5 years after the basement confrontation that changed everything, Marcus Chun stood before a packed auditorium at Ohio State University, delivering the keynote address at a national conference on youth resilience and character development. The audience consisted of educators, counselors, martial arts instructors, and community leaders who had gathered to learn from his experience and explore strategies for preventing the kind of systematic harassment that had once defined his daily existence. The young man who had once struggled to speak without stuttering now commanded attention with the quiet authority that comes from having faced genuine adversity and emerged stronger rather than bitter. The transformation was evident not just in his confident bearing and articulate speech, but in the way he had chosen to channel his experience into service for others facing similar challenges. Marcus had completed his undergraduate degree in psychology with a focus on trauma recovery and resilience building, while simultaneously maintaining his training at Dragon's Path Academy and earning instructor certification that allowed him to teach the next generation of students. His academic research had focused on the long-term effects of bullying and the role of physical training in building psychological resilience, contributing to a growing body of evidence supporting martial arts as therapeutic intervention for victims of harassment and abuse. Master Kim sat in the front row of the auditorium, his weathered face showing the pride of a teacher whose student had not only mastered the physical techniques of Taekwondo but had internalized the philosophical foundations that made those techniques meaningful. The old master was nearing retirement, his body finally succumbing to decades of training and teaching, but his legacy was secure in students like Marcus, who carried forward both the technical knowledge and moral wisdom that defined authentic martial arts instruction. The Dragon's Path Academy had become a model program studied by researchers and replicated in communities throughout the Midwest. Its success measured not in tournament victories, but in the character development of students who learned to face life's challenges with courage and integrity. Alina Chun watched from the audience with tears of pride and gratitude. Her own journey from struggling single mother to respected healthcare professional, serving as inspiration for other families facing economic hardship and social isolation. Her nursing career had flourished in ways she had never imagined possible, with leadership positions and speaking opportunities that allowed her to advocate for vulnerable populations while sharing the lessons learned through her family's ordeal. The apartment where she and Marcus had struggled to make ends meet had been replaced by a modest home in a neighborhood where children played safely in tree-lined streets, though the values forged in hardship remained central to their daily lives. The audience listened intently as Marcus described the psychological impact of prolonged harassment, his clinical understanding enhanced by personal experience that gave weight to academic theories and research findings. He spoke about the isolation that victims experience, the way constant stress affects academic performance and social development, and the long-term consequences that can persist years after the harassment itself has ended. His presentation included video testimonials from other survivors who had found healing through martial arts training, community support, and therapeutic intervention that addressed both the symptoms and underlying causes of trauma. The question and answer session that followed revealed the hunger for practical solutions among professionals who encountered bullying and harassment in their daily work, but often felt powerless to create meaningful change within systems that prioritized order over justice. Marcus's responses demonstrated the wisdom that comes from having lived through what others only studied, offering insights that bridge the gap between academic theory and real-world application. His emphasis on prevention through character, education, and early intervention resonated with audience members who recognized the truth in his observation that waiting until violence occurs is both too late and too costly for everyone involved. The documentary film that had been produced about Marcus's story was screening simultaneously at conferences and schools throughout the country, its message of hope and empowerment reaching audiences far beyond those who could attend live presentations. The film had been carefully crafted to focus on themes of resilience and growth rather than sensationalizing the violence that had marked the climax of his high school experience, with input from trauma specialists and educators who understood the importance of presenting difficult topics in ways that educated rather than exploited. The response had been overwhelmingly positive, with requests for screening rights coming from organizations and institutions worldwide. The legal aftermath of the basement incident had reached its final resolution the previous year, with Tyler Brooks completing his juvenile detention and beginning the long process of rebuilding a life that bore no resemblance to the privileged path he had once expected to follow. His public apology, delivered as part of his court-mandated community service, had been genuine and heartfelt, the result of years of counseling and reflection that had helped him understand the true nature of his actions and their impact on his victims. The meeting between Tyler and Marcus, facilitated by restorative justice advocates, had been emotional and healing for both young men, though they would never be friends and the scars of their shared history would always remain. Derek Manning had struggled more than his former companions with the transition to adult life, his violent tendencies and limited intellectual capacity making rehabilitation more challenging despite the best efforts of counselors and probation officers. His family's business had never recovered from the scandal, leaving Derek to find work in manual labor positions that provided little satisfaction or hope for advancement. The anger that had once made him Tyler's most effective enforcer had been channeled into destructive behavior that resulted in additional legal troubles and extended supervision, demonstrating that some people require more intensive intervention to break cycles of violence and dysfunction. Jake Sullivan had surprised everyone by embracing his rehabilitation with the same analytical intensity that had once characterized his harassment campaigns, using his intelligence to understand the psychological mechanisms that had driven his behavior while developing genuine empathy for his victims through extensive therapy and community service. His college prospects had been permanently damaged by his criminal record, but he had found purpose in working with anti-bullying organizations and victim advocacy groups that valued his unique insights into the mindset of perpetrators. His transformation from tormentor to advocate had been documented in case studies used to train other young offenders, proving that even the most calculating bullies could develop genuine remorse and work toward redemption. Connor Walsh's wealthy family had eventually succeeded in minimizing the legal consequences of his actions through expensive attorneys and strategic plea bargaining, but they could not protect him from the social and psychological consequences that continued to shape his adult life. His entitled worldview had been challenged by the realization that money could not insulate him from all consequences, though whether this recognition would lead to genuine growth remained uncertain. His family's real estate empire had survived the scandal but remained diminished in influence and reputation, serving as a reminder that privilege has its limits when confronted by truth and justice. The broader impact of Marcus's story continued to unfold in ways both measurable and intangible, with schools throughout Ohio and beyond implementing programs inspired by his experience and Master Kim's teaching philosophy. Bullying incidents had decreased significantly in districts that adopted comprehensive prevention strategies, while student reports of feeling safe and supported had increased correspondingly. The integration of martial arts training into physical education curricula had proven particularly effective, providing students with physical skills, while emphasizing the character development that made those skills meaningful and appropriate. The research conducted on Marcus's case had contributed to a growing understanding of post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon by which individuals not only recover from traumatic experiences, but emerge stronger and more capable than they were before. His story had become a cornerstone case study in resilience research, demonstrating that the right combination of support, training, and personal determination could transform even the most devastating experiences into opportunities for growth and service to others. Graduate students and researchers continued to study his journey, seeking to identify the specific factors that enabled such remarkable transformation in hopes of replicating the results for other victims of harassment and violence. Master Kim's retirement ceremony had been attended by hundreds of former students, community leaders, and martial arts instructors who gathered to honor a man whose influence extended far beyond the modest academy where he had taught for 3 decades. Marcus had been chosen to deliver the keynote address at that event as well, his words serving as testimony to the transformative power of traditional martial arts instruction when conducted with wisdom, patience, and genuine concern for student development. The academy itself would continue under new leadership, with Marcus playing an advisory role while pursuing his own calling as an educator and advocate. The relationship between Marcus and his mother had deepened through their shared ordeal, creating bonds of mutual respect and admiration that transcended the typical parent-child dynamic. Elena's pride in her son's achievements was matched by her gratitude for the way his courage had opened doors for her own professional advancement and community involvement. Their small family had become a symbol of hope for other immigrants and single-parent households facing similar challenges, proving that determination and character could overcome even the most daunting obstacles when supported by community solidarity and institutional fairness. The basement classroom at Riverside High School had become an unlikely pilgrimage site for educators and students studying the dynamics of bullying and intervention, its transformation from a place of intended torture to a center for conflict resolution, serving as a powerful metaphor for the possibility of redemption and positive change. The school itself had become a model for comprehensive anti-bullying programs, with administrators and teachers from other districts visiting regularly to observe best practices and learn from the institutional changes that had followed Marcus's confrontation with his tormentors. As Marcus concluded his presentation that evening, the standing ovation that greeted his final words reflected not just appreciation for his insights, but recognition of the courage required to transform personal trauma into public service. His story had become more than just an account of one young man's triumph over adversity. It had evolved into a testament to the human capacity for growth, forgiveness, and positive change that continued to inspire audiences years after the events that had shaped it. The quiet boy who had once walked the halls of Riverside High School with his head down and his dreams deferred had become a voice for justice and healing, whose influence would extend far beyond his own lifetime. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.